Hey everyone, and welcome to the June 14th, 2026 HealthTech Dose Explainer. I'm your host, Leo, and today we are tackling a massive challenge in the life sciences industry, optimizing digital therapeutics to secure clinical data integrity. Now, I'll be honest, I am usually a huge optimist when it comes to the scale and potential of digital tools in clinical trials. I love the tech. But to make sure we stress test this properly today, I'm going to be weaving in the perspective of my colleague Sarah throughout this explainer. She's a grounded, pragmatic researcher who constantly challenges me to align these grand tech visions with actual operational realities, P&L, and risk mitigation. So let's dive right into this.
Like I said, I love championing the sheer scale of what health tech can do today. But Sarah immediately grounded my enthusiasm when we were prepping for this explainer. She basically said, look, if we just procure a bunch of fragmented apps and expect perfect patient adherence across the board, we are essentially just funding random acts of intelligence. The market just kind of assumes these shiny new tools will automatically fix clinical trial bottlenecks. But the reality? Deploying uniform apps often creates massive operational toil and severe risks of missing data.
And let's be real, the stakes here are absolutely monumental. Research shows us that a single failed clinical trial costs anywhere between $800 million and $1.4 billion. Just let that sink in for a second. Because of those staggering numbers, missing data is quite literally the ultimate enemy of research and development. We can't just deploy a digital tool, cross our fingers, and hope the data flows in cleanly. We have to be strategic.
So to get us from idealistic tech deployments to a grounded operational reality, we're going to hit 4 key areas today. 1, designing for drop-off. 2, the universal accessibility myth. 3, the complexity advantage. And 4, building the operating system.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, designing for drop-off, or what we often call the adherence paradox.
So what if I told you that chasing perfect long-term adherence is actually inflating your clinical trial budgets? It sounds totally counterintuitive, right? But we have this industry-wide obsession with extending digital subscriptions indefinitely, assuming that more engagement automatically equals better data. But contrasting this futility with what we actually need reveals a totally different approach, which is architecting clinical off-ramps. An off-ramp simply means we stop billing and we stop pushing engagement the moment the maximum clinical benefit is achieved. We really have to start designing for the reality of how patients actually behave.
To put that into perspective, take a look at the Economic Evaluations of Digital Therapeutics report. It brilliantly illustrates this point. In a hypertension model, extending patient engagement indefinitely didn't actually yield better results. Instead, it caused the cost per QALI, that stands for Quality Adjusted Life Year, to totally skyrocket to over $37,000 while the clinical benefits completely plateaued. Pushing for perfect adherence basically ruined the trial's cost efficiency. So, the crucial takeaway here is that we need to plan for attrition. Now I want to pivot to some incredibly encouraging research by Wallner and colleagues that looked at digital therapeutics in occupational rehabilitation in Germany. Their paper demonstrates that trials can still be highly cost-effective, even with a massive 85% patient drop-off. No way, right? But it's true. You absolutely do not need 100% perfect adherence to secure your value proposition and achieve scale. But how in the world do you survive an 85% drop-off? Well, you have to design the trial to capture front-loaded value. You secure those early cycle benefits right out of the gate. And crucially, you utilize your digital apps not as permanent tethers to the patient, but as early warning systems. If the app detects fading engagement, you intervene before the patient drops out entirely. If we architect these off-ramps, we protect our data and our budgets.
Moving right along to Section 2, the universal accessibility myth and the problem with universal app rollouts.
We really have to ask ourselves, are decentralized trials truly democratizing access, or are we just dropping a standard uniform app onto a frail 80-year-old patient and then wondering why we end up with missing data? To ground this debate, look at the research by Esser et al., which focused on remote monitoring in older adults with heart failure. They define this concept called telemedicine unreadiness, and it's a critical barrier driven by cognitive impairment, sensory limitations, and reduced digital literacy. When we ignore this and just force a one-size-fits-all app onto vulnerable patients, they inevitably disengage. And what does that lead to? You guessed it, missing data.
And honestly, I fully concede the point to Sarah's perspective here. Look at this study by Seinche and colleagues on Swiss cancer survivors. It shows nearly 70% of participants had low digital health literacy and over 75% struggled with navigational health literacy. Assuming everyone can just easily navigate a clinical app creates massive And I mean massive manual toil for the trial coordinators who are left trying to chase down that data.
Okay, so what's the solution? Well, according to the Esther paper, to protect data integrity, we must build adaptable guardrails. A prime example of this is implementing proxy-supported reporting. By integrating the caregiver directly into the digital interface, we stop treating the app as an isolated standalone fix. Instead, it becomes part of a connected clinical ecosystem. We adapt the technology to the patient's reality, not the other way around.
All right, Section 3, the complexity advantage. This is all about automation versus humans.
This brings up a really fascinating paradox. If we invested millions in digital tools specifically to automate tasks and reduce headcount, why are clinical teams still so absolutely vital to a trial success? Well, the data paints a stark picture. Drawing again from that economic evaluations report, 89% of patients will abandon a self-guided mental health or metabolic app after just day one if there is no human intervention. Only 11% sustain engagement on their own. The reality is, technology alone cannot replace the therapeutic alliance.
But here is where the magic actually happens. When we inject what we call human density, think things like nurse-led triage or clinician-facing dashboards, the results are staggering. An average patient engagement of just 6 days can be extended to a massive 40 days. The digital tool acts as the bridge, for sure, but the human touch is what keeps the patient walking across it.
Now let me clarify something really important. This does not mean we are hiring a massive fleet of nurses to just sit and stare at dashboards all day long. It means we stopped thinking of automation as entirely replacing humans. Instead, we use technology as a scalable triage filter. It creates an augmented environment where clinical staff only intervene by exception. That right there is the true complexity advantage.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 4, building the operating system and achieving strategic alignment.
It's time to bring this whole debate back to our North Star and transition away from chaotic, individual tech experiments. To summarize everything we've covered today, the true goal here is capability building. We literally must stop funding fragmented apps. Instead, we need to architect an augmented operating system, one that anticipates and actively manages patient frailty, plans for those inevitable drop-offs, and adapts to varying levels of digital literacy. That is absolutely the only way to ensure clinical data integrity and achieve true strategic alignment across the entire R&D pipeline.
So, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. Take a hard look at your own organization right now. Is your R&D pipeline strategically aligned through a cohesive, augmented operating system? Or are you still just funding random acts of intelligence? It's a critical question, and how you answer it is going to determine the future viability and cost efficiency of your clinical trials. Thank you so much for joining me for this HealthTech Dose Explainer. Now let's get out there and build that operating system.